Hello, everyone, and welcome to How I Built This live quarantine edition. How are you? I hope you're healthy and safe. We are taking your questions right now, so just ask away in the comment section. And if you're not on Facebook, you can send your questions to our Twitter handle at How I Built This. Today, we have just an incredibly wise and just good human being on the show, my friend Simon Sinek. Simon, as many of you know, is the author of several books, including Start With Why, Leaders Eat Last, and his latest book, The Infinite Game. I saw Simon speak in San Francisco back in January. It was so good. It was so inspiring. He talks about business and business resilience in a totally radically different way. So, like, instead of competition, he focuses on collaboration. And instead of, making increasing profit your goal, Simon suggests, why not, making your goal be a sustainable business that lasts forever. Anyway, I have known Simon for a long time, actually, since we were teenagers, and he really is one of the wisest people I know. Simon, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Guy, it's such a treat. I've been a fan of yours for longer than you've had a radio show. So
no, first of all, where are you? Right, tell everybody where you are.
I'm in Los Angeles.
And
I'm in Los Angeles.
And
everybody's good and safe, family safe. I have a few friends who've had it, but the good news is they've recovered.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, I know that you love going to the theater, and when you're in New York, you love going to museums, and you're really into seeing dance performances, which is something you've written a lot about and talk a lot about. How are you just coping? I mean, how are you kind of staying sane? What are some things that you're doing?
Well, I think sort of my secret coping mechanism here is I'm a homebody, so staying at home is fine, and I'm doing the best that I can to still support the arts. I'm trying to buy a bit of art here and there, just still trying to do my part to support the arts.
Nice. Again, we're taking your questions, so you can ask away in the comment section in Facebook, and we'll try to get to as many as we can, because I know there are probably a lot of questions. Excuse me, for Simon. Let's dig into The Infinite Game, Simon. This is an incredible book. It came out last year, and Simon's been speaking about it across the country. And as I mentioned, I got to see some of that in San Francisco. First, can you just kind of outline what this idea of the infinite game is?
Absolutely. A philosopher by the name of James Carse articulated these two types of games in the mid-1980s, finite games and infinite games. He says that if there's at least one competitor a game exists, and there are the two types of games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed-upon objective. Football, baseball. There's always a beginning, middle, and end. And If there's a winner, there has to be a loser. Then you have infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players, which means any player can join at any time. The rules are changeable, which means you can play however you want. And the objective is to perpetuate the game, to stay in the game as long as possible. When I learned this idea, I saw it as profound, because we are players in infinite games every day of our lives. There's no such thing as being number one in your marriage, for example. You can't win in your marriage. The goal is to make it last as long as possible. That's the goal.
Right.
There's no such thing as winning global politics. There's no such thing as winning education. There's no such thing as winning healthcare. There's no such thing as winning your career. And there's definitely no such thing as winning business. But if we listen to the language of so many of our leaders, they talk about being number one, being the best, or beating their competition.
Right.
Based on what? And so if we have to be players in the infinite game, we have to play with an infinite mindset. And so that's what I wrote about.
So there are 5 principles that you outline in the book, particularly for business leaders who want to try and adopt an infinite mindset. So let's kind of quickly go through them. The first one is to advance a just cause. So talk about that for a moment.
So, the concept of having a vision in business is not a new one. The problem is it lacks a standardized definition. And if you listen to too many leaders and they say, our vision is to be the best X, or our vision is to increase top line revenues by Y, these aren't visions. They're just goals. They're arbitrary goals set to arbitrary dates. And so I changed the terminology of vision so that we can be crystal clear of what we mean. Rather, instead of showing up to simply hit a goal, we want that goal to be in service to something even grander, a just cause, a cause so just we would willingly sacrifice to see to get closer to that to get closer to that idealized state in the future. So what does it mean to sacrifice? It could mean working late hours or frequent business trips. And though we may not like these things, we feel that they're worth it because we feel like our work is contributing to something bigger than ourselves.
Right.
And any organization that's playing with an infinite mindset absolutely has a just cause they're trying to advance.
I want to get back to that later on because I just did an interview for How I Built This with somebody, Pat Brown of Impossible Foods, whose business is exactly that. I mean, his idea isn't to make a lot of money making a meat product. It's to basically contribute to it's basically to cut back on global climate emissions. But we'll get back to that. The second principle, building trusting teams. So
right. So as human beings, we're social animals, and we're no good by ourselves, but we are remarkable in groups. And so great organizations that are able to survive for many generations beyond whoever the leadership is now have strong cultures, and strong cultures are made up of trusting teams. We all know what it feels like to be on a trusting team. It means you can raise your hand and say, I made a mistake, or I don't understand the job you've asked me to do, or I need help, or I'm scared, without any fear of humiliation or retribution. In fact, we say these things with total confidence that others on our team will rush to our support. We also know what it feels like not to be on a trusting team, where we don't want to admit mistakes. Right. And we don't want to admit that we don't know how to do the job we've been asked to do, for fear that it'll either put us on a short list at the end of the year or hurt our chances of advancement or promotion.
All right. The next principle for trying to create and adopt an infinite mindset: study a worthy rival.
Yeah, this is a lot of people. This is one of my favorite ones. So in a finite game, you have a competitor, you have competition. And in a finite game, football, baseball, you want to beat the competitor. You want your score to be higher than theirs at the end of the game. But there's no such thing. There's no finish line in the game of business. So trying to beat our competitors actually hurts trust, hurts cooperation, and hurts innovation, because we become so obsessed with a small number of arbitrary metrics over arbitrary deadlines that we can actually do so much damage to our organization. Great organizations, infinite-minded organizations, they view the other players in their industry as rivals rather than competitors. And some of those rivals are worthy of comparison, which means there are other players in the game who do what you do better than you. Whether it's their marketing or their culture or their hiring practices or just the quality of their product, they do things better than you. And what we want from our worthy rivals is their strengths reveal to us our weaknesses, because the only true competitor in an infinite game is ourselves. It's ultimately a game of constant self-improvement. Yeah. And so by having our weaknesses revealed to us, we can work on them.
This is probably the most appropriate one, number 4, for the moment we're living in, which is amazing. You wrote this book last year, and the fourth principle is prepare for existential flexibility. Wow. Yeah. If ever there was a moment to prepare for existential flexibility. You know,
it's so funny when I wrote about it, I talk about how it'll happen once, maybe twice in an entire career, and some leaders will go through an entire career and never have to do an existential flex. Yeah. And now here we are. My company is going through it right now ourselves, and so many of the majority of companies actually have to go through it. Existential flexibility is the ability to make a 180-degree turn in your company to either take advantage of a new technology or deal with a completely changed environment. When the internet showed up, companies had to make an existential flex or they would go out of business, and some are still playing defense.
Yeah. So we're going to dig more into that in a bit, I'm sure, as well, because we're in this moment now where we really need to think about existential flexibility, how to shift an entire business model, or how to build resiliency. The last and fifth principle is demonstrate the courage to lead. So that may seem self-evident. Well, I'm a leader, I lead. But what does courage to lead actually mean?
So many of the standard business practices that exist today are not actually infinite-minded. They're very finite-minded. And many of the standard business practices that exist today that we consider quote-unquote normal are not normal. The idea of shareholder supremacy, where we put the wants, needs, and desires of a disinterested external constituency over our customers and our employees, was a philosophy that was promoted in the late 1970s and popularized in the 80s and 90s.
Yep.
and now it's become standard. The use of mass layoffs on an annualized basis to meet arbitrary projections was did not exist in the United States prior to the 1980s.
Yeah.
And you see a whole bunch of these philosophies that were propagated in the 80s and 90s that are standard today that are very, very, very finite minded. So the courage to lead is the strength of character to say, even though that's what everybody else is doing, I think that is wrong for the health of my business, and I'm going to do it differently. And that is difficult.
Simon, we have so many questions coming in, so I'm going to dive into them, and I'll come back to some of mine hopefully later if we have time. But I'm going to start with another Simon. This is Simon Troutman. He asks, "What are your thoughts about connecting and motivating team members with their why?" This is in reference to a book that Simon wrote, Start With Why. Many of you have probably seen this TED Talk. How do you connect and motivate team members with their why in the absence of being physically present, of being together?
Well, the good news is that every single human being has a why. It's inherent. The question is whether we are able to put it into words, whether we're able to articulate it. It's the sum total of how we were raised. It's who we are, and the rest of our lives present us opportunities to live in balance with our why or not. The decisions we make, the friends we keep, the jobs we take, the things we do will reveal to the rest of the world who we are.
Yeah.
And so the good news is finding one's why is a relatively simple exercise, believe it or not. There are many, many ways to do it. I wrote a book called Find Your Why for people who like to do it in workbook fashion, because we know people are asking this question during these COVID times.
Yeah.
We have a workshop on our website called Jumpstart to Why, where it's I think a 2-hour workshop where we help people do it. But I can tell you an exercise that people can try, and you can just do it for free at home. And it's called the friends test. Find the friends, think of the friends who you love and they love you. Don't do this with a spouse. Don't do this with a sibling or a parent. Those relationships are too close.
Uh-huh.
Do it with a friend who you know that if you called them at 3:00 in the morning, they would take your call, and vice versa. And ask them this question: why are we friends? And they're going to look at you like you're crazy.
Uh-huh.
Because what we're asking them to do is put into words a feeling they have towards you with a part of the brain that doesn't control language. So they're going to look at you and be like, why are you asking me this?
Yeah.
And then weirdly enough, you actually stop asking the question why, because the question why evokes emotional answers, but we want rational answers. So now we actually start asking the question, what? Come on, what is it about me? What specifically is it about me that I know that you would be there for me no matter what? And they'll struggle because they're attempting to put their feelings into words. And they're going to start just describing random things like, I don't know, you're funny, you're loyal, I trust you. And you have to play devil's advocate. You cannot help them. You cannot let anybody else help them. And you say, great, that's the definition of a friend. What specifically is it about me that I know you would be there for me no matter what? And you're going to go through this exercise, and it's going to torture them. And eventually they'll give up. Eventually they'll say, look, I don't know. And they'll start describing themselves. I don't know. This is what my friends told me. I don't know, Simon. All I know is that I could sit in a room with you and I don't even have to talk to you and I feel inspired. And I got goosebumps. In fact, I'm getting them right now. In other words, your friends will say something to you that captures your value in their lives, which is your value in the world, which is your why. It's the thing you fill for them. And if you do it with multiple friends, you'll either get similar, if not the exact same answer. And every time they say something and you get that emotional reaction, you get goosebumps or you well up, you're in the ballpark of your why.
Love it. This is a question from Vivek Sinha. Wow, Vivek, I'm a physician. Every day I walk in and I see the staff facing their own fears and crying behind the mask while they care for others. And he writes, I'm at a loss on how to motivate these already highly motivated people. I am humbled by them and draw strength from them, but how do I motivate the already motivated? How do I lead the leaders?
So he doesn't have to motivate them. As you said, they're already motivated. They're showing up every day. What he has to do is take care of them. For better or for worse, the way that the civilian medical community operates is very different than military. And I've been reaching out to combat medics and asked them, how do you deal with extreme stress and the crazy ups tempo, the crazy pace where it's nonstop and it's hard every day? How do you deal with it? And in the military, they teach them to be open with their emotions, to ask for help, to accept help, to cry and allow and create safe spaces for others to do the same. In other words, to address those emotions. They teach that this is trauma, and everybody will have to deal with trauma at some point. And so to bottle it up and keep it somewhere, it's going to come out later on. It's going to come out hard. And I've been talking to a lot of nurses, some nurses on the front line, and what I'm learning is one of them joked, every doctor and nurse she knows is a functional alcoholic, and the drinking has gone up considerably. And the point is we all of this tough guy stuff that you have to be strong. No, you don't. And the best thing we can do is that if you see someone crying, go up to I'm going to cry myself, go up to them and put your hand on their back and just stand with them and let them cry with you. Just don't let people cry alone.
Yeah.
That's the best thing we can do for each other.
I wish I could give you a hug right now, but I can't because we have to physically distance, Simon. So next time
I'll take a rain check.
You're in the Bay Area, I will give you a hug for sure. I'm wondering, Simon, for years and years and years, and you've written a lot about this. Companies were so focused on growth. Small businesses, everybody was focused on growth, hyper growth. And you've been pushing back on this for the last few years, saying no, that should not be the objective. The objective should be to play the game, to what's wrong with a business that actually doesn't make a whole lot of money, doesn't lose money, but actually is sustainable and employs lots of people right? And what's wrong with that as a business model? So we're living at such an unprecedented moment, right? I mean, that word unprecedented is now overused, but in some ways, this is the moment to think about the infinite game, right? And if you are a business owner and you are looking at your revenue either dramatically decline or stop, how would you begin to apply the principles of the infinite game to to keeping your business going, or B, to you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's attack one thing, which is these are not unprecedented times. The business world is well familiar with changing technologies or cultural conditions that completely challenge existing business models. The emergence of the internet completely challenged entire industries. There's no such thing as a video rental store anymore. They don't exist. And entire industries were flattened, and some are still playing defense. And so these are not unprecedented times. This is more sudden. This is more jarring.
Yeah.
But having a business model challenged because of some sort of cultural or technological change in the world is not unprecedented. And so it's the ones who define themselves by where they're going, by their just cause, who know why they do what they do, that will have better ability to adapt than those who define themselves by their product. So I'll give you a great example. There's a pizzeria in Chicago that makes 70% of its income from selling slices. Well, that just dried up. So the great thing is he didn't look at his resources, his pizza oven, and say, well, I have a pizza oven, I can't make pizza, I'm going out of business. He took a step back and he said, I have resources here that I can do other things with. And so he has this pizza oven, and he found that he can take medical grade plastics, and because his pizza oven can get hot enough, he can melt them and bend them. So he's now making face masks to sell to hospitals to protect the frontline medical community. Yeah. Because he has this. In other words, he's pivoted based on the resources he has and his desire to stay in business.
Yeah.
We cannot. There are some business. Take for example, taxi companies, right? Taxi companies were challenged by Uber. Well, it's not an app that put you out of business. It's because you weren't able to adapt and improve the quality of your product. So we have no choice, which is we have to look at the resources we have and the talent we have inside our companies, and that's how we figure out how to pivot. I use a technique in our company because we had to pivot. We make most of our revenue from live events. Well, that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And so I used a technique that my friend Jen Waldman taught me, where I asked every single employee I have, I gave them 48 hours to bring 15 ideas each about what we could do. And they freaked out that I asked for 15. And the reason you want that many is because if I ask them for 3 or 4, they're all going to give me the same 3 or 4 ideas. And by the way, those are the same 3 or 4 ideas that I had.
Yeah.
15, when you start getting 11, 12, 13, and the thinking starts, now you've got something.
I love that. That's such a great idea.
And that management doesn't have to come up with a solution.
Yeah.
It's not one person at the top who's like racking their brain. What can we do? Get your people involved.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, what we're doing here is an example of that from our team. Let's just bring people on like Simon and the founders who've been on the show, and let's talk about resilience, right? Because this is a time where people really want to hear about ways to build resilience in their businesses. The question I just asked you also was inspired by Keith Spreckles from Manhattan, Kansas. Thank you for the question, Keith. This is from Scott Lerner. He asks, "What guidance do you have to influence how do you influence a senior leadership team that puts shareholders first, right? Like how can you change their view that shareholder supremacy is a flawed model?"
So the answer is you can't. We cannot change people's minds, and especially if they're multiple levels up above us. No number of anonymously sent books will change their mind. The way to do it is to be the leaders we wish we had. That we have to adopt the infinite mindset, and we have to lead the way we wish we were led. And what ends up happening is we have really high trust, really high performing teams around us, because we've now taken upon ourselves to make sure that everybody comes to work, feels inspired, feels safe, and returns home fulfilled by the work that they do.
Right.
And what starts to happen is these little groups, sometimes they're divisions, tend to be higher performing inside the company, which means one of two things happens. Senior management leaves you alone because you're doing well, or if they're curious, they come and say, "What are you doing?" And either way, some of the people in that group will get moved or promoted into other groups, and they'll take what they've learned, and then you'll start to see little pockets of great leadership in other places. And before you know it, that person at the top who still has an old-fashioned view of business, they're dead or retired.
Yeah.
And before you know it, the tail's wagged the dog. If we take an infinite mindset, we have to appreciate that it may not happen as quickly as we would like, but we can outlast them. Our philosophies can outlast them. Which goes back to the question you asked before about the obsession with growth.
Yeah.
There are two currencies in a business: will and resources. Money is still important, because if you can't remain solvent, then you can't advance any cause.
Right.
So having financial growth is perfectly legitimate, but not at the expense of the will of the people. And that's the problem, because money eventually runs out. No matter how much you have of it, it eventually runs out. The will of the people is an infinite resource. All we have to do is take care of people, and they'll give us all of their will and ideas and motivation and everything we could ever beg for or ask for, and we could never pay for.
Yeah.
And so I don't understand, well, I do understand, it sort of comes with this finite obsession from the 80s and 90s, why companies are obsessed with hypergrowth. Like, show me one document, show me one study that says high-speed growth is a healthier way to build a business. Right. There is zero data to prove that, because it's not. It's simply the demands of investors. From an investment community who's looking for liquidity events in 3 to 5 years. That's why they want hypergrowth.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the health of companies.
Simon, I want to get back to this idea of a just cause. Next week we're going to be interviewing a lot of chefs and food people, including Daniel Hume, was named the greatest chef of the world at one point. He runs 11 Madison Park. That restaurant in New York is closed down, but he has totally shifted. They are making 2,000 to 3,000 meals a day for anyone who needs it in New York, for elder care, for hospital workers, for homeless shelters. I mean, it's amazing. And I talked to him last week, and he said, I've never felt like I've had a greater purpose in life before. Like, this has been a transformational personal moment for me, because all of a sudden I feel alive, and it's just amazing to hear that, this idea of a just cause, of really kind of doing something in the service, either in service to others or for a greater purpose. A lot of companies talk about what they do as, in the service of others or for a greater purpose, but I think some of that, or maybe a lot of that's marketing. Yeah. What's the difference between the marketing and the reality? How can you tell?
It's reality if you actually believe it. Every company is purpose driven now. Every company has a purpose statement on their website, right. But watch how they make decisions. Actions and words have to align. That's what authenticity is. Authenticity is when what you say and what you do are actually the same thing. And organizations that say, I found a purpose I want to give to others, but when COVID comes to an end and we go back to normal, the question is, will those lessons remain? Because being in service to others doesn't necessarily mean taking care of the elderly or the sick. Now, what I would love to see is those same CEOs, those same leaders, when we come back, which is they are more profoundly moved to take care of their people and take care of their customers than they ever were before. Rick Elias is a great example of this. He did a TED Talk a few years ago. You remember the U.S. Airways plane that landed on the Hudson with Sully Sullenberger? Rick Elias was sitting on that plane.
Yes.
And he gave this fantastic TED Talk about what he experienced when silence was the sound of a flying aircraft. And he was profoundly moved by this near-death experience. He was one of those hard-driving financial guys, money, deadline. And he came out of this a profoundly moved human being where now he's obsessed with taking care of his people. His company has grown way more now since that experience of that profound leadership lesson that he learned. So what I hope is that this is not temporary, that the lessons last. Yeah, and you're also interviewing one of my favorite people in the world, Christina Tosi.
She is wonderful.
And one of the things she's doing on with Milk Bar is if you go to milkbar.com and you go buy yourself some cookies or cakes, one of the things that we've heard from a lot of hospitals is one of the things they want are cookies and cakes, awesome. A little sugar and a little love.
Yep.
And so if you go buy something there, I think it's up. I don't know if it's up yet. That you can choose to buy another box of cookies at a discount to go specifically to a hospital.
It's awesome. I'm going to do that right after this, actually. I love it. Here's a question from Nick Lubbers. I know you get a lot of college students at your events, Simon. He's a college student, I'm assuming. What advice do you have for somebody graduating college in this environment, looking for a job or starting a business, or who might with good reason feel demoralized about the current situation?
Sure. So there are good reasons to be down and depressed and think about all the bad things and all the disadvantages. And we should do that. Like, we should have our moments to go through that. But at the end of the day, like, there's also good that's coming out of this. And what I would like him to do is sit down and make a list of the 20 unexpected good things that are coming out of this. Just write down a list of 20 really good things that have happened.
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, I can tell you a few for me and that others have experienced. I'm texting a lot less. And what I'm doing is calling people a lot more. And hearing that tone of voice, it's just a magical thing. And I hear other people doing the same thing. I think we're recognizing that as a society, we've over-indexed on defining success in terms of productivity. And in reality, our health and our happiness, it's not directly proportionate to how productive we are. Yeah. But rather, it's like we're living a life like the 1950s right now, which is kind of nice. Like, we stop working, we turn off the computer, and we go have dinner with the family every single night.
Yeah.
There are 20 really great things that we should write down, and that's where the opportunity lies. Yeah. That's where the opportunity lies, and the ability to find a job, the ability to create a job, the ability to figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life can start out of that list.
I'm going to go to one more question from our audience. This is from Camelia. I hope, Camelia, please forgive me, I'm trying to pronounce this right. Camelia Sadeghi Dadgar. She asks, Simon, what are the most important positive things or thing that you want people to kind of take away from this experience, from this health and economic crisis?
Service, taking care of each other. Service, the definition of service is the willingness to sacrifice for others, the willingness to sacrifice for a cause. And I think that our nation has forgotten how to sacrifice. If you go back to World War II, there are plenty stories of young men who committed suicide because they didn't get drafted.
Wow.
That the call to service was so powerful that when people would buy, people who couldn't go to war would buy war bonds so that they can contribute to the war effort. And people who couldn't afford war bonds would plant war gardens. So they could. So there was this overwhelming sense of we're in this together.
Yeah.
And service requires sacrifice. Sacrifice means giving up something that I want, that I like, that I need, that it hurts a little bit. And shared sacrifice, the magical thing of shared sacrifice, is it actually brings a group of people together. Look what happens when there's a natural disaster, when there's a hurricane or a tornado that rips through a state. All of a sudden, politics, color, religion, sexuality, it goes out. Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
When there is shared hardship, we come together. And I think we have to recognize, and it's kind of amazing now, for the first time in my lifetime, and the first time in probably all of our lifetimes, we are connected to every human being on the entire planet.
It's incredible.
We can relate to somebody who doesn't look like us, sound like us, and have an entirely different point of view on the world, simply because we've gone through something similar and we have a shared experience, shared hardship.
Yeah.
And so the question is what can we sacrifice for each other? That's the definition of service. And this is a real opportunity to relearn service, I think.
I'm going to go for one more question before we go, Simon, because there's just so many and there's such good questions. This is from Barry Peterson. What companies or leaders come to mind when you think about the infinite mindset? Which companies that you know of are actually have this right, are doing this right?
There's a good list, and it's when you say the names of the companies, it becomes obvious.
Yeah.
Patagonia, for example. Patagonia is way more interested in advancing the cause than simply meeting their numbers. And the amazing thing is, they're probably one of, if not the most profitable companies in their category, because they recognize the benefits of the infinite mindset. Cliff Bar is another company that is built with an infinite mindset. Sweet Green is attempting to create a foundation that can outlast everybody there.
Yeah.
Airbnb, Brian Chesky has announced he wants to be an infinite minded. He wants to lead in being an infinite minded company. It tends to be some really forward thinking older leaders.
Yep.
Kip Tyndall, the founder of Container Store, he's one of those leaders, even though he doesn't lead Container Store anymore. But there's a younger generation. There's a Gen X and Gen Y generation of leaders who have rejected the okay boomer version of capitalism, where we prioritize the arbitrariness of a goal over the life of a human being, and we don't care about advancing a greater good. And I'm very optimistic that there's this new breed of company that will undo the damage done during the 80s and 90s by leaders like Jack Welch and those who followed him.
Awesome. Well, I hope so indeed. Simon, just hang on for a sec. I just want to shout out to a couple people listening. Gloria Duarte in Cary, North Carolina, Greg Garcia in Dallas, Susanna Manel in Oakland, here in the Bay Area. Hello, Susanna. Bernardo Bieler in Miami, Mary Petkoff Tremblay in France. We've got Joshua Bergen in Crofton, Maryland, Siobhan Lee in Singapore. Thank you for listening. Hilda Helzen in Belgium, Monica Aranda in Modesto. There's so many more. Thank you. Anna Maria Saric in Croatia. Wow. Thank you so much for watching. A couple of quick announcements. Next week, we are doing chefs and food writers and restaurant owners, and we're going to talk about how this crisis is impacting what they do and how they're meeting this crisis, what they're doing. We're going to have Kyle Connaughton, a Michelin 3-star chef, on Monday. Alice Waters, the legendary Alice Waters, on Tuesday. Daniel Hume, who we talked about earlier, of 11 Madison Park, all the incredible work they're doing to get food to hospitals and people in need. That's on Wednesday. Christina Tosi of Milk Bar on Thursday. Also on Thursday, we're going to have Jose Andres at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And then on Friday, the great Samin Nosrat, one of my favorite food writers in the world. I'm such a fan. So excited for this next week. So join us every single day at 9 a.m. right here. Facebook.com/howibuiltthis. We've got a new bonus episode coming out tomorrow. Came out yesterday, sorry, with David Neeleman and Tristan Walker. And then on Monday, a brand new episode of How I Built This on your podcast queue with Brooke Lennon. Thank you all so much for watching and for being here and for being part of our community. We're here to talk about resilience as no one I can imagine doing this with who's better than Simon Sinek. Simon, thank you so much. I wish I could be there with you. We could be hanging out. Hope to see you soon. And thank you.
Be safe. Take care of yourself. Take care of others.